Africa youths will not let you down. The belief and the hope you have in us surely will materialize, and that will be a long life legacy for you, even after the whole after when the whole world ends. I believe that your names will be written in the minds of everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's collective effort.
Yes, yes, sir. I really appreciate it. I want to appreciate Morgan Truke. You are a phenomenal woman. Morgan is going to be part of the speakers today, and I want to really appreciate you for standing by Future Savers Initiative from day one. Since we've met, you've never stopped your support. You've been there strategically supporting, advising, giving your technical abilities to lift us, to make us even popular in the United States of America. With your initiative, you've really helped us a lot. And I want to say thank you so much for that. Thank you so much.
Honestly, thank you for all of the work that you do and for the inspiration that you bring me each and every morning when I wake up, because you guys are 5 hours ahead of me. So I literally wake up inspired by all the work that you're doing every day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Soja, my friend, my Indian friend, namaste, Baya. I really appreciate you for believing in this project as well. And I want to say thank you so much, Dayavadi, for what you've done for us.
Thank you, Ransom. Thank you for the kind words. Hello, everyone. This is Soja Lahiri from India, but I'm live from Mauritius. You can say I've spent 3/4 of my life in Africa, and that's why the connection to Africa. Otherwise, when you find your childhood in Africa, basically you're connected to nature, and I've always been pro-nature, and that's how I and Ransom connected. And Dr. Richard, Morgan, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you both.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Sheyi Adebote, and for your support, for your belief. You are a phenomenal young guy. Like me, we share the same idea. We also share the same name. I want to say thank you for your support. I really appreciate you for coming on board.
It is my pleasure, brother.
Thank you so much. Dion, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you for every good work you're doing in Namibia. And I know that we are going to really make an indelible impact in Africa together. I believe so. You need to unmute. You need to unmute when you want to talk, because you're still muted.
I figured that. I'm just saying thank you for having me, and good luck. Congratulations first and foremost with the initiative. And I just hope that things just roll on progressively here on forth.
Thank you. Thank you. Matt is here.
Nice. We have Matt here.
Yes, we have Matt Lifla. Matt Lifla is the chairman of Earth Day Network in Africa. He's a phenomenal guy. I want to appreciate Matt because your partnership made this easy and made this happen. I remember the first time I made mention of this idea to you on our Zoom meeting. You didn't tell me you're going to think about it. You didn't tell me if it's going to be possible or not. You just said, let's do it. And that is why we are here. I really want to appreciate your team. I want to appreciate your tenacity for carrying the whole of Africa together, for connecting everybody. You are managing a lot of countries, a lot of people in our diversity and in our differences. You were able to make sure you bring out the best from every one of us. I want to appreciate you. I want to salute your courage, your passion towards the environment, towards youth in Africa. And I want to say, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I would like you to say one or two words, because your section will be on as soon as possible.
Sure. Hey, thank you so much for having me today, Ransom. It was a pleasure to connect with you. For those, is this just a group of panelists right now that are on?
No, we have over 32 attendees at the moment. We have more people joining, but we have about 12 panelists right now on board.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess before I sort of go over my section, I want to say thank you. So for those who have not worked with, my name is Matt, and I work with an organization called Earth Day Network, and I was connected with Ransom and Future Savers Initiative a couple months ago in preparations for Earth Day. So I work with 9 different staff members in 9 sub-Saharan countries, and Nigeria is not in one of our 9 countries where we have staff, but we've managed to build probably one of the largest networks we have for getting ready for Earth Day in that country without a full-time staff member and just volunteers like Ransom and his colleagues, and it's been quite incredible. So I'm really happy to join the call today and sort of relate things to sort of the Earth Day movement in Africa, and you know, maybe find ways to further network people together so we can keep on continuing a lot of the environmental work that we're doing today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. My next appreciation goes to my team members here. I have Thompson Live, I have Molade. Also, these young guys have been the support system for Future Savers Initiative in Nigeria. We are very young, but very dynamic, very smart guys. I want to say thank you to you guys. I know it might, it might look kind of appreciating our effort, but then you guys deserve the accolades. Without you, you working behind the scene, without you, this would not be a possibility today. So I want to say thank you so much for supporting the project, for supporting the initiative. And I want to say that I hope for a successful day together with you guys. Africa is a very beautiful continent with a lot of diversity. And to be honest with you, Africa is blessed with a lot of young, smart people. But then one of our challenges has been the political terrain that we find ourselves. I was having a chat with Dr. Richard recently about involvement of African youths in the system. I think African youth just want to be carried along. They just want to be part of the system. And I think it is time for African youths or African to lift themselves or to stop feeding or stop hoping for a fantastic tomorrow, a better tomorrow, maybe from the African leaders. I think it's time to take the stage ourselves. I think it's time to create our platform. It's time to create our platform ourselves. Oh, we are live on Facebook now. It's time to create our platforms. And I want to tell you that Future Savers Initiative is an NGO in Nigeria with a passion for Africa. This is not the NGO with the aim of selling just our home brand to the world, but we have this initiative of creating a platform for every young people in Africa. We have the initiative to create, we have the initiative to create, to bring people on board from every part of Africa so that young people can take charge of their life, their destiny, and also rule with the resources that has been deposited to them. This webinar is not all about Future Savers Initiative, no. If it were, I think I know a bit of renewable energy, but I think I have someone better in Alice, a professor, and someone who is better to talk about this. I think I know a little bit of innovative volunteerism as a result of following Dr. Richard, but I think Dr. Richard is in the best position to be the one to teach us about innovative volunteerism, food production, and the likes. I think I know a bit of youth and climate financing in Africa, I think, from what I've read, but then I don't think I can do it better than Sheyi and Dion, and that is why Dion and Sheyi is on board. I think I know a little bit about the Earth Day from what I've read, from the things I've done in the past, but we have found the best possible person to tell us about Earth Day, the significance and why Africa needs to participate. And that is why Matt Leffler, he's on board. And I think I know a bit of agriculture. I'm a farmer myself. I'm a farmer, I have a farm. But when it comes to solutions to agricultural issues in Africa, I think I have someone who has a passion for Africa and who has a passion for hydroponic farming in Morgan Truke. And that is why Morgan Truke is here today. So this webinar is not just about Future Saver. It's not about me hosting you. It is to you. It is for you to give us solutions. We don't want this webinar to be like the usual thing in Africa. We are known to be smart. We are known to talk a lot. We are known to talk about our problems so much that we have not really been talking about the solutions. And I think today is all about solutions. And that is why these fantastic people are here to talk about solutions. And this is going to be a platform that every young people in Africa will build on from now. It is not just going to end in this webinar. Our speakers are not just going to leave us here. They are going to be with us to build the future that we desire. And after this, we're going to have what I call the strategic point of action. The strategic point of action, because climate action is the way forward. We don't have to talk about just talking about the whole problem anymore, but then the action. And that is why we have talked about profiling solutions to climate crisis in Africa, from agriculture, from renewable energy, power poverty, food production. Dr. Richard is so keen about how climate action rather, can bring food to the table of every Africans. And that is why he's here today. So it is not my show, it is your show. It is the whole of Africa depends on your prowess, on your intelligence, on what you can offer us. And I would like you to give us the best, but the most important thing is action and the resolution that we can have after this webinar. I have read about the conferences around the world. I've heard about is it COP25? Shay, can you correct me?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So from what we read, there is no resolution. Everything didn't end well because there is no cooperation. But here in Africa, we want to create a platform for cooperation, for sustainable solutions, practical solutions, not just grammars, not just some philosophies, things that are practically, things that are workable in Africa. This is Africa, things that are workable in Africa, and that is what we want. So it's my pleasure to open this, this fantastic and this webinar. I believe is going to go down in history of Africa. And in 2020, even as the COVID-19 has locked every one of us at home, I believe that we are change makers and nothing can tie us down. And when it comes to solution, we are passionate. And I want to tell every one of you that is watching us today that you are in for a great time. I also want to plead to every one of our speakers to stay to the end. We are not going to take any of your time, much of your time. I would like you to really stay. And I want to introduce the next speaker, who is Matt Leffler. Matt Leffler works with the Washington, D.C. based Earth Day Network as campaign director for Earth Day Africa. Prior to his position at Earth Day, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Gambia, where he spent 2 years serving as teacher, environmental educator, and assisted waste management entrepreneurs with their businesses. Matt Leffler is the chairman and the coordinator of Earth Day Africa. I want to introduce Matt Leffler to take on the program right now. Thank you so much, Matt Libla.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me today. I'll try to keep it brief, but to the point here. So I think what I'm going to cover today, just really briefly, is, Earth Day and the importance of citizen engagement and sort of how you can use, days and sort of movements like this as a way to, get people involved, in civic action in their communities, and to also sort of build upon the work that you're already doing. So. Hold on, let me just.
Sherry, can you mute?
Hello, sir.
Sherry, please, can you mute?
Oh,
can you mute
okay.
your microphone? Yes, you're live. Yeah.
All good. Cool. So let me just kind of roll back, just to introduce the organization that I'm representing today. So Earth Day Network, it's a nonprofit. We're located in Washington, D.C., but we have offices and staff globally, nearly in every continent. So we're a nonprofit with a mission to build the world's largest environmental movement in order to drive transformative change, where we use Earth Day, which is April 22nd of every year, sort of as a platform to promote and facilitate, environmental education, civil service, to sort of build upon campaigns like citizen science, and then lastly, to form a really powerful network and community of environmentalists, of everyday citizens, in order to, as I said again, sort of drive change and get people to participate in the environmental movement globally. So, our work is global. We have partners and volunteers in nearly every country, and we have staff all around the world. I'm personally working with the Africa campaign, where I work with 9 different staff members in 9 different sub-Saharan countries. And we're working to use Earth Day as a platform to sort of bring our work together and to bring different organizations and citizens together to spread positive messages about the environment and bring out some change. So let me go back and just sort of talk about the first Earth Day and sort of the history. Now, Earth Day is the largest civic action-oriented day in the world. And I think it's a great example if we're trying to talk about, getting, the everyday person involved and sort of using individual voices to make, a larger voice that's almost impossible to ignore. So the first Earth Day was in 1970 on April 22nd. So, and it occurred in the United States. And essentially, what happened was in the 70s, not only in the States, but globally, you saw, massive consumption of gas and oil. Industry was unregulated, and, there was lots of pollution sort of spewing out of factories. You saw oil spills in bodies of water. There was a huge loss of biodiversity in our wildlands, and you saw toxic runoff from agriculture that was affecting our natural lands and water systems. Okay, so this led for people to really want to change, and this wasn't just, one group of people. It wasn't just the youth. It was the young, it was the old, it was the professionals, it was the students. There are people on different sides of the political spectrum. It was the rich, the poor, the farmers, the city dwellers. They all had a stake in the environment, because it wasn't just, our ecosystems that are being affected. It was also the health of citizens as well. So people, they came together and they gathered in the streets and in the parks and in city centers and schools and universities in order to demonstrate for a healthy and sustainable environment. This was done in the form of marches or in teach-ins or people just getting out and doing cleanups or tree plantings in their community. So this led to about 20 million people taking part in this day, Earth Day, on April 22nd, 1970. That was about 10% of the US population. So once this happened, there was, radical changes in environmental legislation in the states. The Environmental Protection Agency was formed. You see the Clean Air and Water Act, and it sort of goes to show that, if individuals are able to come together, they're able to, bring out actual change and sort of, voice, their concerns about the environment and human health as well. So now Earth Day, it's global. It's celebrated by over 1 billion people, and it's celebrated in nearly every country in the world. And this year it's so important because it's the 50th anniversary. And I think this is so important because right now, I think Earth Day is really starting to become a pretty big thing in sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, Earth Day Network, this is the first time we've ever had, staff members on the ground for Earth Day in Africa. So we have nine staff members from 9 different sub-Saharan countries, and sort of what they're trying to do is bring people together in order to bring about actual change. So these staff members and volunteers like, Future Savers Initiative and a lot of our partners, what they've been doing is they've been recruiting thousands of volunteers. And these, are the young, the old, they're environmentalists, they're members of nonprofits, they're teachers, they're students. And they've also been getting hundreds of different sort of organizations to partner up together, not just with Earth Day Network, with one another, sort of as we're seeing on this live chat today. And these are nonprofits, they're universities, they're government institutions, they're women's groups, they're youth groups, and so on. And what they've been doing is sort of recruiting each other and creating networks in order to use Earth Day as a platform to build off the work they're already doing and bring people together to showcase the work they're doing, and also, inspiring others, to start making some changes, So we've seen organizations, and volunteers do things like organizing cleanups or having, environmental teach-ins on plastic pollution. They've been doing, environmental education, activities with, schools involving teachers and students. They've been engaging universities and their university clubs and different departments, to hold gatherings on campuses. There's a lot of citizen science effort that's going on. A lot of local artists, whether it be musicians or painters or people involved in drama, have been using their art in order to inspire others and to educate people about local environmental issues, from tree plantings, getting faith groups involved. So these are kind of the things that, partners and people within our network have been doing prior to Earth Day. We like to say that Earth Day is not a day, it's a movement. There's a before, during, and after, and we've seen tons of people just doing great things in their community in order to help others understand local environmental issues and so on. Now things have obviously changed. There's 2 crises going on in the world. There's COVID-19, and there's also the slowly building environmental disaster of climate change, and local environmental issues, like deforestation or, or pollution or waste management issues. But it seems, or what sort of happened over the past month or so is, we see environmentalists and everyday citizens and members of Earth Day Network, they have really pivoted, in order to deal with, the fact that public gatherings have drastically changed and have been able to do things digitally. So there's been a massive digital mobilization in order to drive action big and small and give citizens a voice and a platform in order to demand change. And we see this on, on what we're doing right now. There's people from all over the world and from Nigeria, on the, on a webinar today and sort of talking about, Earth Day or the work they're doing in particular, or giving, their expert opinion on a different environmental matter. And I think that's quite impressive. And, ever since this, this change has been going on, we've seen so many digital events going on. Last week we had a webinar with the Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies, involved the Greenbelt movement in order to host a webinar on citizen action and Earth Day. There is a pretty awesome event hosted by FABE International, which is an organization in Nigeria, actually, and they partner with the Ministry of Environment and other environmental experts actually this Sunday in order to hold a virtual summit for Earth Day that focus on sustainability and climate change post-COVID-19. And the list can go on. We just have so many partners globally that have just really found ways to get involved. You know, they're on their social media, you know, posting what they're doing, you know, inside or at the individual level, and it's quite impressive. If people want to continue to get involved in Earth Day, you know, I would encourage you to kind of do what we're doing today, you know, and that's just getting on social media or getting on online platforms and finding ways to chat with others, you know, just forming a simple thing like a WhatsApp group, you know, and just talking about things that are going on in your community is so impressive. You know, for those in Africa, if you want to get, you know, even more involved, we have a Twitter page called Earth Day Africa. It's, you know, and essentially we use it as a way to repost things of what people are doing and to share stories. And, you know, I think from now and on Earth Day, what we're going to be doing is sort of sharing videos and photos of, you know, of the stories that people have in Africa. And, you know, I would encourage people to sort of follow that page if they want to get involved and see what their peers are doing. We have a lot of content and we're going to be pushing it out from, you know, now until and after Earth Day. You know, of what the everyday person is doing, you know, and it's just a really cool place to check out stories. So I hope I didn't talk too long. That's kind of my take on Earth Day and sort of how it relates to everything today. I'll probably send some things in the chat today, some links if people want to sign up or if people want to use some of our toolkits to get involved digitally. But, you know, we're all in this together and I'm so impressed that we have, you know, just tons of people on the line today sort of talking and presenting about, you know, their stake in the global environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt Lifla. That was a fantastic one, taking us memory lane and making us have the whole picture of what Earth Day is doing and what many Africans are doing on Earth Day. I also want to appreciate the Earth Day coordinator here in Nigeria, Gerard, for his passion towards the Earth Day, bringing a lot of people together. I really want to say thank you so much for your efforts in making this possible, and I really want to say thank you. And I want to appreciate Afronelli. Afronelli has been, she's just a young woman, but then she's someone I really look up to. I draw a lot of passion from Afronelli for bringing me on board in so many opportunities. And like, I really want to say thank you. So there is a Q&A section there for anybody who wants to ask questions. I'm so sure that you would like to ask questions. Before I call the next speakers on board, but then before then, I would like to ask one single question, and I would like Matt to answer via chat so that everybody can see it. So okay, so definitely the one or two things. So before then, Matt will be showing just a small clip, but then I won't ask one question. I won't like, maybe Matt can just say that in just one word because of our time. I really want to stick to time today. It's very important. But then, Earth Day is a movement. Matt, are you listening? Earth Day is a movement, and
Yep.
How do you intend, and what are your plans to really make this event a sustainable one so that it won't look like during Earth Day or when Earth Day is approaching, that's when all this surge will be happening in the whole of Africa. What can you do to really make this a true movement so that even after Earth Day, young people will still continue to be more conscious about their environment? We don't want this to look like Christmas. we want this to look like an everyday thing. So Matt, what is the solution for that?
I think the solution
And
is this.
yeah,
Is just network. Like, you know, after this call, I would recommend, you know, each person connects with one person in their community or someone that they haven't connected with in the past and add them to a WhatsApp group or something and find ways to continue the conversation. I think that's the best thing. And, you know, I'm going to send my email address out today as well, or a way to sign up if you want to get emails from me. And I think that's a great way to network as well and sort of stay involved in the work that we try to do. So network's the word. If you don't think we have time to show the video, it's totally cool as well. I can't hear you. I think you need to unmute yourself.
I think I would like you to show the video.
Okay, sure. Let me,
Yes.
so this is something that is going to be premiered on Earth Day. It's not the final cut, but it has some interviews with some of our partners as well as Ransom. So let me just get it up and then I'll share my screen. So 1 second here.
Thank you.
Let me try to get it. Screen.
My name is.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, let me share my screen. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, are you able to see it? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
wow.
Yeah? Okay. Let me get the volume up. Sorry if it's a little quiet.
My name is Oluwisi Ransom. I am the founder of Itosiba Sustainable Development Initiative. My name is Otuecha Pomwachi from Ghana, and the president of Eco Warriors.
Hello, my name is Fatmaisa, also known as Dr. Fatmaisa. I'm from Tanzania, also a student of Sokoine University of Agriculture. Moreover, I'm volunteer of FA Movement.
My name is Kato Kiwesemuya, CEO of the African Wildlife Foundation. My name is Daniel Stolen, Executive Director of Green Shango Environment Trust, environmentalist by profession as well as development studies. One of the major environmental issues we have in Nigeria is deforestation. In most urban centers in Ghana, trees are cut down to allow for development. And this is contributing to deforestation.
There is improper waste management. I, as a volunteer, am advising my community as well as the whole world. We must have the proper waste management by having different tools such as dustbin and performing cleanness in our environment.
We are really facing climate crisis, especially in Africa, that is projected to be the most heated continent. What are we doing? What do we wish to see? Policies which are favorable for the protection of environment. One of these big problems is the nonchalance of the government towards the environment. We need to be engaged. We need to represent wildlands that are so important in addressing climate change. So what we do is we plant trees along the major streets in the country. We are planting mango trees, exotic and indigenous trees for fruit that is sustainable development, capturing climate change and resilience. One thing we do is by creating climate clubs in these primary and secondary schools so that these children can start now by planting trees in their houses and as well creating a climate club by making them leaders in their clubs. On Earth Day 2020, let's fight for it.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Matt, for the opportunity. Thank you for the video. Yeah. I guess a lot of people. Okay, can you bring back your video so that we can?
You want me to
All
bring
right.
the video back on the screen?
No. I mean everyone. Yeah, I think I'm not seeing a lot of. Yeah, good. So thank you so much. We are going to be moving quickly to the next section, and that is the section is going to be shared by Dion and Sheyi Adebote from Nigeria. Dion is a youth advocate working on sustainable development issues, and he is interested in development plans, and he has chosen to identify as an active agent of positive change. He has worked with the International Youth Climate Movement, and is an active member of the UNGO, and also he has worked as an official of the UNFCCC. And he is also the co-founder of the Namibian Youth on Renewable Energy, working to advance and mainstream youth participation in the energy sector. The United Youth, UN Youth Namibia program focused on youth and the United Nations system. So I want to really welcome Dion. And before that, I will quickly read a short profile of Sheyi Adebote, who is going to be sharing the time with Dion today. Sheyi Fumi Adebote is one of Nigeria's leading environmental advocates and a respected media consultant also, and with over 6 years experience across broadcast and print industry. He is committed to helping young people get engaged across environmental issues and building climate smart startups across Africa. He's a very committed youth, and also he's very passionate about education and nation building. And she is also part of the delegates of Nigerian youth that attended and represented Nigeria in the recently concluded COP25. So I want to welcome both of you on board. They are going to be talking about youth development and climate financing in Africa. So Dion and Sheyi, who is going first?
Thank you very much, Sheyi. Dion, please take the lead.
Sure, I was actually going to give you the privilege, but if you would you like to go first? Like I was planning to let you go first.
After you, my brother.
Oh, okay. So I have no choice now.
Dion, we would like to see your face. We would like to see your face, Dion.
I think I'm on.
We would like to see your face, please.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Just check.
On yet.
Yeah, really. I can see myself though.
Yeah, we can see you, Dion.
Okay. So I think for starters, as a departure point, I'll just like try and keep it a bit casual with our presentation and just share off the top a little bit based on our experience. So in particular, my work is related around advocacy, participation, and engagement for young people within the whole space of the climate change regime. In particular, if you break down the science, the process, and the action, I'm very focused on the process point where the strategies, the policies, the visions, the laws, regulations, and stuff like that come in, or the social contract, in other words, between us, society, and the state. In relation to climate finance in particular, I've been also participating, trying to support youth accessing climate finance institutions and instruments such as the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, and all of these special climate change funds that are out there. And starting at the international level, what we've been able to do in the last couple of years through the official children and youth constituency to the UN Convention is engage the GCF, given that the GCF falls under the Conference of Parties. So it somehow is subjected to the convention as opposed to other bodies that sit with the World Bank. So the GCF in particular was very interested to see how we could have a youth equity under the GCF fund to ensure that out of the total expenditure of money coming in and going out, there's a little bit of percentage that is reserved basically for young people, because there's challenges around youth actually putting their ideas into a proper format that would qualify for a proposal at the GCF. It's even very expensive to actually put together a proposal for the GCF. That's why most African governments often hire consultants to come in and develop these proposals, so they stand a better chance, as opposed to us young people that clearly don't have that assistance, and we just have ideas that are mostly just sitting on a Microsoft Word or just some basic concoction of ideas. And often when you talk to bodies like GCF, you need to be very technical, because they don't look at the nobility or the empathy towards why this idea needs to be executed. They look at the technicalities, the sustainability, and all of these broader inclusive policies that are sitting around. So GCF is still looking into that. It's still a battle for global youth, because access to climate finance is not only an African youth problem, it is a global youth problem. Most young people globally have that challenge. So they have done things like internships. They've done things like awards, youth awards. Last year at COP, there was the first GCF Youth Award on young people. And I think Elizabeth from Kenya, the young lady from Wangari Maathai's Greenbelt movement, had won that one. And then coming to the African level, though, you still find that in Africa, funding itself for the continent is a challenge. Now, if you have to include young people, that's going to be a massive challenge, a double challenge, basically. So from the African continental perspective, we as the youth have to now choose where do we fit our agenda, because currently most funding is going towards mitigation. In fact, I would think around $500+ billion was the target in the last 2017-2018 year in terms of climate finances. And out of that, at least 93% went towards mitigation, and about 5% goes towards adaptation. And so there's still not enough flows coming into Africa for the challenges we are facing, because we are not looking for money to set up big climate resilient projects, takeoff projects, especially in renewable energy, because most of us are still dealing with basic adaptation challenges like floods, water resilience, community adaptation, and stuff like that. So with the AFDB, they've done several initiatives trying to support youth. If you look, I'll leave Dr. Richard to touch on the UNEP emission gap reports that will also highlight how far we are. But for AFDB, they have this program called Jobs for Youth, which was targeting to employ a massive number of young people and create jobs for them. And then they launched a program called Youth for Entrepreneurship for Youth, or something of that sort. However, it's still not necessarily climate finance or focused. And so you still have a large chunk of money missing for the young people in Africa. If you come to the smaller bodies, the SADC, the West African, the EU, the East, and then the North, you find that even those regions, young people still don't have direct access to funding. And then you break it down even to a national level, we still have challenges accessing most of these projects, because if you look at the proposals that are put in by government, they are mostly run at a high level where young people are not even part or aware, basically, of such strategies. In Namibia, we have a Green Climate Fund strategy. So we make sure we don't have too many people applying, but we have a unified coordinated move. And I try to induce youth participation in there. The appetite is there, but the challenge is that our ideas are not packaged in such a way that they speak to the funders, because the funders have, some of them have the finances, but they don't have the ideas, and the youth sit with a bulk ideas such as frugal innovation. If you look at how young people are coming up with very innovative ways since Malawi from Kenya, the young man from Malawi, I just forgot his name. In other words, now I'm looking now, trying to figure out what exactly is then the next step for Africa. And one of the main things that we have found in climate finance is that currently climate finance is really dominated by mitigation in a very unfair manner. And if you look at 1997, when we adopted the Kyoto Protocol, it gave some type of transition for the clean development mechanism for that type of funding. But the clean development mechanism, I think the second year commitment period should be ending in 2020. And that commitment then gave birth to incentivizing the private sector in getting involved in climate financing. And that is what we are failing to do with adaptation, because there's still no quantification of how exactly does the private sector benefit from funding adaptation activities, unlike mitigation, where they have this profit for carbon, because we put price on carbon through the Kyoto Protocol Clean Development Mechanism, and therefore the private sector was immediately interested because they saw a value proposition and incentive in that sense. So with adaptation, there's still that challenge, and currently I'm aware that the African Development Bank is working on a mechanism similar to the Clean Development Mechanism, just focusing on adaptation for Africa. But it's still not there yet. And I would like to think young people, especially young Africans, the scholars, the thinkers, should start looking into that area so that we can facilitate the support of financial streams. All this adaptation funding is coming less and less towards our continent, and it's having more restrictions. And if we have to throw Corona on top of this, obviously the commitment to fund climate change within the article of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreements all come back to developed countries saying we will fund any residual costs of developing countries transitioning from carbon-dependent economies to low resilience. But now with Corona, obviously, it's gonna be a bit tough for most of them to support publicly. So that leaves us with only one choice in most cases, and that's the private sector, because even all our public funding is not necessarily enough for adaptation funding in terms of youth. And now, in terms of how the youth who are not necessarily scientists or activists can also be involved, because we often leave out this group. This is the group with the ideas. We are basically the ones who put the whole concept together and the structures. But the people who take action, they are often the last to understand what's going on. They just receive a booklet at a community level or just an infographic or an article, and we expect these guys to actually understand how to innovate. So maybe we need to think about youth entrepreneurship targeting climate financing in the resilient sectors like water, agriculture. And then from that point of view, especially starting with the AFDB, we would be able to probably then stimulate that type of thinking amongst the young Africans, especially the entrepreneurs and the creative ones. And it's funny that today is actually the Creativity and Innovation Day. So it's also a very important part that's missing in this innovation of climate financing. The other aspect that's also youth-centric is technology. I've noticed that often we don't consider how technology can support climate financing, especially if you look at blockchain. You have a very good avenue to actually cut out a lot of middlemen that are often required to help identify sustainable projects that have the scalability to then be replicated across the globe. And that technology aspect, I believe, is where we can also start thinking about future models to find best evidence practices and share them across the continent, because there's probably great projects facilitated across the continent now, but you won't find that one-stop shop where you can find out what did they do with their problem, how did they handle this particular challenge when they build a dam. And all of this, for example, needs then that evidence-based policy formulation, but context is obviously very costly, and you would need to go on the ground to collect that context on the ground. And often technology can help us do that without us having to travel the entire continent with all of this. I think that's more or less my position on how I've seen the current climate finance regime is looking like. It is not youth friendly, nor are we looked at as a separate disadvantaged group, even if you look at the gender, because gender is a very important, because there's certain principles, in fact, in climate finance that have to be followed that are not the same as private financing for whether it's treasury, whether it's housing and stuff like that. With climate finance, we've got these principles that ensure, one, it's a fair and equitable engagement, that the donor country does not come and kind of like control how the recipient country is being governed with this climate financing. That's why they have these national designated authorities, which are often the climate change focal points, who often first sign off a letter of no contention before the GCF can approve anything that comes from the particular country. We've got other policies like respective common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities. All of these principles are making sure that there's a fair and even ground. However, even with all these principles, the youth agenda is still lacking, because our agenda only blew up in 2015, I would say, because before that we were literally just mostly young people attending these meetings, and only in 2009, for example, would we form a formal constituency under the UNFCCC, and then the young people will keep going until 2015 in Paris, where they would fight for the intergenerational equity, which you find now being used by the current generation of young people like the strikers and mobilizers and the Fridays for Future movements and all of these. All of their movements are based on intergenerational equity, which is found in the Paris Agreement. That is something that young people fought for almost a period of 7, close to 10 years. So there's a lot also we need to understand that longevity would only be given to us through consistency, by always being there and forming part of the process. Because if you think about it, the clean development mechanism from the Kyoto Protocol is the one that's giving us a problem with finalizing the Paris rule book right now. Because after agreeing on the Paris Agreement in Katowice, Poland, Morocco and Bonn also would be the subsequent COPs that came after the Paris Agreement. And they were also not able to facilitate this technical toolkit that helps us have modalities of how we are going to implement the Paris Agreement. So what's been happening since, we have been trying to negotiate the contentious parts of we've rather been applying Rule 16, which is basically kind of like postponing a particular item or agenda item that is not agreed upon for the next session. And they've been doing this since the Paris Agreement has been adopted, and only adopting the lighter issues like ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment, which is like Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and Article 6 of the Convention, and then I think it would be Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which just touches on public mobilization, public access to information, training, capacity building, education, awareness raising, and so forth. And these were some of the first agenda items that are always adopted at the last COPs, and they are sitting well right now. But climate finance, especially the clean development mechanism, in terms of how it will survive when it's translated into the new Paris rulebook, is exactly where we are stuck now with the whole UNFCCC and the whole negotiation system. We are still not sure how that carbon mechanism, or what they call it, the market mechanism, Article 6, but it's basically the clean development mechanism, again, trying to get a lifeblood in terms of how it's going to move forward. So the intergenerational principle inside one of these climate finance principles is that they are looking at it from gender. But what's dangerous is that when they talk about gender, they somehow get stuck on women, which I often find very weird, because even the constituency that came up with the gender action plan is called the Women and Gender Constituency. It's not called the Women Constituency. And so we're losing out on the arc that is supposed to chart for us going forward, because you cannot, you would be known as a standalone item in the negotiations. Youth, you're just a standalone item. You're not specific, and often you are not. And you've never been an agenda item, in fact. So we have to squeeze ourselves towards the gender, women agenda, and that's the only one of the only ways we'll get funding that will come directly through the systems and the processes. So I'm very much interested to see how much work we can still do to break through that, because we have not done a good job as youth ourselves. There's also no quantification of our projects. How much does it actually cost to finance youth in Africa? Which areas of climate change activities are they most focused on? Because so far, if you talk youth, they will look at the street mobilizers, the guys that are raising awareness, community door to door. But there's also young people that are very active in the innovation space, in the scientific space, and all of these many youth ideas are left out. So in terms of climate finance, I would like to believe that it needs to start at an international level, coming down to a local level. And as African youth, adaptation should be our main focus going forward, because mitigation has a lot of support already, and it's also very competitive for young Africans in that space, because often the private sector comes in with capital that we cannot compete against and technicalities that we also can't. But where we can also compete well is adaptation, because Africa right now is having that challenge, and there is not enough capacity around that area of adaptation. And so as Africans, we have to figure out how do we compromise whatever we do on mitigation to also equate some type of financing for adaptation. Because if we are not bringing adaptation to the table, nobody else does. Basically, the worst of that would be the adverse impacts like loss and damage, which I don't even want to mention. Those guys, that topic, that agenda does not even get funded. Since Paris Agreement, they've been trying to block that one out of the negotiations. So there's also these contentions, efforts from certain parties to ensure that adequate financing does not reach Africa, or at least under the commitments, they are not meeting them. The Green Climate Fund is supposed to have $100 billion annual funding from 2020. We still have not seen that replenishment happening. So we definitely have to become a bit more innovative, look at local financing, sourcing money from our own communities, but in particular looking at the private sector like mining companies. The polluter pays is another principle that could help us out on that agenda. And while this is all theoretically a good idea, in practicality, Africa has a different terrain when you're trying to do certain activities. And one of our shortcomings we need to figure out is corruption, for example. How exactly do you deal with corruption? Which is one of the reasons why financing doesn't come directly to Africa, because as long as illicit financial flows exist, it's very difficult for the market to respond to us, because markets don't like uncertainty, and they like policies that give them some type of stability and consistency of their investment. And as long as our governance in those climate and financial governance modalities are not in place, it would be a tough one to obviously reach that stage. So it is basically,
thank you,
yeah. Okay.
I really want to say you have actually done a fantastic job, but because of our time, I need to cut you because we have some of our speakers here. If I allow you to talk now, you can talk for another 2 hours. I guess you're not very conscious of my chat. I'm trying to put some chats across to you. But then there is one very jamming question, and I would like before Sheyi will come on board, because actually we've elapsed your time, but then Sheyi is going to come on board. Just 2 questions. It is, I want to be very practical. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an environmentalist. I run an NGO in Nigeria, and I have fantastic projects. And it's always sad that I have to write proposals for 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get climate finance for my projects. The question is this: Africa has this mentality that every fund has to come from Europe or from the United States of America. Why is it like that? Why can't Africa start providing solutions to climate financing locally? That's number one, because it could be discouraging for a lot of young people coming up with great ideas, wanting to create change in their environment, but the funding is a problem. I believe one thing, that a lot of people are receiving funds, and that is the aspect I want you to come on board. How do we track? How do we know people that actually use this money judiciously? That's number one. But then for the people who do not really get the access, is it not time for African to say, we can take charge of ourselves? I know what I'm saying now. Dr. Richard will be very interested, because I know he believes in Africa and how we can solve our problem locally. Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm tired of seeking from abroad. Like, I'm tired of that. And I believe a lot of young people in Africa are really tired of that. We need to start getting funds from from our local channels. I really want that to happen. So then, what can we do? I want to open the floor for Soldier, then Dr. Richard, just for two minutes each. How can we make climate access or climate financing accessible? How can it be more lucrative so that we can get funding? I want Soldier to just say.
I think Soja can go ahead and answer that question. Maybe it's out of internet. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Soja should just step in until.
Sorry, I mean, I just lost everybody for a minute. I guess it's my internet connection. So just to highlight on the fact that which Ransom mentioned presently, how to get climate funding, because it's very much clear as to what we have just heard, that the fund does not reach whatever it is not possible that something is being allotted and it does not reach its allotted destination, but it does not reach down to the grassroots. So we need to find out methods of generating funding through the existing corporate structure for the climate purposes. Obviously, there are factors like the government stepping in for compulsory CSR contributions, of which there needs to be allotment for funding. However, we on our side, the micro level, in fact, this also brings in the youth entrepreneurship, where people from business, let's say, if I had given this example to a friend sometime back, if we have selling the same kind of food, if actually sharing under that name. This is not a good idea.
It seems we have lost Soja. Sheyi, welcome back.
Am I back? Internet connection is horrible, so I'm trying to stay connected as much as possible. Samson, am I audible to you?
Yes. Go ahead now, please.
Okay.
Yeah, Soja, I think we can hear you.
I'm not sure how much of what I I was just bringing across the point of business integration at a grassroots level, and by this we can create feasible business models for even those entrepreneurs who are willing to come across, and we can create. We can go from small enterprises to medium enterprises and large enterprises, which go ahead and support the the climate funding and obviously environment related funding. This is my take on what the corporate or the small and medium sector can do in order to generate climate funding. So I would just take over and
Okay. Soja,
Thank you. I would like Dr. Richard to speak briefly on that before Sheyi Adebote will come on board. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think John did exhaust this, and I think Sonja has brought up some excellent approaches. Let's face reality here. The architecture of financing for climate change globally, and especially so towards Africa, is not one in which we should be hopeful about. And I say this, I mean, I don't need to be beating around the bush here. If you look at the continent today, the continent needs 1.2 trillion US dollars every year to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And the continent at the same time, if you were to take the nationally determined contributions which were submitted, not even to talk about the revisions that are happening now, there is a study that showed that the continent to implement its nationally determined contributions that all the 54 African countries submitted will cost the continent 3.5 trillion US dollars. I mean, these are astronomical amounts. And the reality is that when you look at the GDP of the entire continent, the amounts are above that. The GDP is about 2.3 trillion or so. The point is, if you look at the amounts that come into the continent each and every year, vis-a-vis what is expected to implement the nationally determined contributions, those amounts are just peanuts. And therefore, there is need to be able to look internally. And I've been saying this over and over again. If Africa doesn't look internally and leverage any amount of money that comes in as a risk guarantee, Africa will never be able to have the requisite financial needs that are required to be able to drive climate resilience in the continent. And so there are two things that need to be done, which I was supposed to touch this, which is the continent of Africa doesn't lack the resources to be able to drive climate action. If you look at the illicit financial flows, do you know how much each and every year the continent is losing as a result of illicit financial flows? Over 50 billion each and every year the continent is losing. Capital flight out of the continent. This is reality, this is not fiction. When you look at how much Africa spends in importing food, 35 billion US dollars, it means that there is money in the continent. Exporting employment, importing unemployment. The point I'm trying to make here is about prioritization. And dependent on climate finance, in terms of grants and waiting for that, is just as sweet as music. And we can dance that music till the world comes to an end, but it's never really going to change that much. So what needs to be done is for Africa to look internally and leverages on structures that it have got. For example, if you go down to communities where I grew up in our village, our mothers used to contribute money in the form of what they call cooperatives. They call it Njangi. I believe it has a different name in Nigeria. In Kenya, yeah, they call it chamas and all those little structures, or they call it SACCOs, where people put their money in it. What needs to be done is that any money that comes in as climate finance money in the continent should be used to incentivize these kind of structures that are grounded in community values, to ensure that at least they can act as a risk guarantee so that these financial institutions at the local level can loan to young people. And in case of any default, they can be able to de-risk that. This is logic. And if that is not done, the story of climate finance will continue. The amounts that come into the continent will end up in projects. And my argument around this is that it is not about projects per se that will build climate resilience in the continent. It is which kind of projects that are implemented from an enterprising dimension that can create opportunities, financial dividend, environmental solutions, and socio-economic challenges addressed. If that is not done and premised as enterprise actions, then we might not be able to ever to overcome this. I think I'll stop here since there is no time.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I really appreciate your input. You made mention of a cooperative society, and I think it's one thing where we in Africa that is really, really workable. In my dialect, we call it ajo. That is, people come together to, you know,
if I may just add to what Dr. Richard said, I think the cooperative is a very good idea, and this can be worked out. But also, it comes with the same problems as to the confidence that people may have on that cooperative, because everybody, when it's actually you can say in human behavior, that when you're putting in something, you expect something in return. Now, when a cooperative works, whenever we're doing some sort of an investment into something, the cooperative or the people participating in the cooperative would be expecting something in return. So we really need to chalk out the commercialities or the economics of that well in order to make it work. Waiting for Ransom to just add his views on that.
I think Ransom is having some technical issues, so let us just move on. Sheyi Adebote, can you please give us your contribution? Thank you.
Hi guys, thanks a lot for having me. It's been very interesting listening to everyone speak, from Matt and then Soja and then Dr. Richard and my colleague Dion. So, I mean, there is little I have left to say. Dion has touched on the need for the entities, funding entities, to create a special sector for youth, just the same way it is for the gender sector. Dr. Richard has also talked about the need for us to come up with localized approach, such as internal savings and all that. Soja also made a very valid point earlier, where he talked about the need for us to be creative in what we're putting out to funders. And I mean, one thing that what do you make of climate finance on the African continent? And
I guess Sheyi is I'm not sure if Sheyi is still online, but hello Sheyi, are you there? Okay, I guess Sheyi is off. So I guess Sheyi is off now. So I will let Dr. Richard to actually come on board now to take us through his section, is next. And if anybody have Q&A questions, you can drop it in the question box so that Doctor will answer through the chat. So Doctor, I want to welcome you on board, but before that, I would like to read a bit of your profile so that a few people can get to know. Dr. Richard is the African Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Program, UNEP. He is responsible for guiding the actualization of UNEP climate resilient development strategy for Africa in a manner that ensures human well-being. He is leading a continental-wide strategic and innovative approach to climate action implementation, ensuring agro-industrialization is achieved and wage opportunities created for the youth and women as well as climate aims of mitigation and adaptation are realized simultaneously with leading socio-economic priority of countries. I really want to welcome Dr. Richard on board. He is the pioneer of innovative and the inventor of innovative volunteerism in Africa. Welcome on board, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sei, and everyone on board, and to all the panelists and those who are listening. And thanks for not coming up with this initiative, but at the same time trying to bring everyone on board. I have been thinking what I'm going to say in 10 minutes. Food security is not an issue that can be discussed in 10 minutes only, but I will try to do what I can do. But what I would like to say, and I think Matt did allude to this, is we know, well, today, 50 years ago, millions of people took to the street to protest against environmental ignorance. And today, this is what we are doing, not protesting only against environmental ignorance, but against something that is already upon us, which is climate change. So for those of you who have listened to me, you will notice that I like to mix African proverbs into my discussions. And one of those is that having a good discussion is like having riches. That's an African proverb. And so I believe that this discussion today is actually an opportunity for us not only to enrich ourselves with knowledge, but also to enrich ourselves with the kind of actions that we're supposed to take to build climate resilience in the continent. We are at a time which is quite very unprecedented, and unprecedented because of realities that are already involving human beings. We are at a time in which the changing climate is no longer an abstract issue. We see drought, whether it is in the eastern part of the continent, that plunge millions of people into suffering, go to the Sahel. We see floods, and these are realities that are happening with each and every one. And one African proverb puts it in perspective, and I think this sums up my discussion in 10 minutes, which is that God has created lands with lakes and rivers for man to live, and the desert so that he can find his soul. What this African proverb reminds us is that when difficult, destabilizing times like the ones in which we are in today, they present an opportunity for a call for reflection. A call for reflection for us to regroup, to re-strategize, and at the same time also relaunch stronger. And I think that is what we are doing here today. So I would appreciate that we all, if we're in a room, we give a round of applause to future savers. And I wanted to discuss with Saeed today that I wish he could add, instead of calling this future savers, you call it today and future saver, because what we are doing today is actually very, very important that will determine the future. So that said, we are...
Thank you so much, sir.
Just about, you're welcome. Just about 3 months ago, Africa and the rest of the globe, so to speak, have been plunged into a crisis never ever seen after the First or the Second World War. That has disoriented life, and I'm talking of the COVID-19 that is a global pandemic, and this has forced us even to interact here virtually. We could have been sitting maybe in a room in Abuja or Lagos discussing these issues. The impact of this pandemic is beyond this convenience we are experiencing today. Global economies are already feeling the impact. And when you take that down to the African continent today, I projected 1.4% of the GDP, equivalent to about 29 billion for the entire continent. Reported that the continent have actually seen a decline of that. And the worst case scenario with the projections in which we are seeing points to a negative growth in 2020, as low as negative 5.1%. What these figures means is that the reality is not just about a recession, or a deep recession in which we're going to go into. We're talking about lost jobs here. We're talking about lost opportunities, especially for the most vulnerable people in the continent. And we're talking in a continent where the informal sector creates up to about 80% of the entire employment of Southern Africa. And so an African proverb puts it in perspective that the child of the crab walks sideways like its mother. You know, a crab, right? The child walks sideways like its mother. And so this COVID-19, if you put that proverb in perspective, this COVID-19 represents another daunting reality to Africa's growth, in addition to the food insecurity and climate change. And this is impossible to ignore. So we cannot discuss climate change moving forward without putting the perspective on the realities in which COVID has actually not only done to the continent, but is going to do. And so climate action moving forward must be done within the context of post-COVID-19. And I say this because as grim as these statistics that are mentioned may seem, we cannot deny the fact that with a significant proportion of about 80% of Africa working population engaged in the informal sector, that's where over 60% of the entire continent is rural. There will be no climate action. And these people depend on the agro sector to be able to put food on the table. These are realities. And so even when you look at the GDP figures shrinking, to an extent, this means that the GDP calculation may sometimes not present the full economic picture of the entire continent. And when you factor in climate change calamities or climate change stress, then you know what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about, well, in Kenya, you call them matatu drivers, the border drivers. In Nigeria, I know it's Okada. In Cameroon, where I come from, we call it Okada as well. We're talking about these people who make barely just about $100 a day or even less. And these are the people at the forefront that we need to always have in mind. And the reality is that as we discuss these issues today, these people are actually suffering. So when you look at these looming threats, the COVID-19 realities that are impacting the entire world, impacting the informal sector, people impacting youth, impacting everybody, then you juxtapose this with the reality of the continent. 257 million citizens going to bed hungry every day. This is not just a statistic, as I always say. This is about lives of people who go to bed with their stomach aching of hunger each and every day. When you put this within the context of young people who get into the labor market each and every year, over 13 million of them competing with less than 3 million jobs. And then you're talking of a continent that manufacturing has stagnated at less than 10%. And it is the least productive continent in the entire world. Then this challenge is compounded. And then you bring in climate change, which is threatening to shrink the entire economies of the continent by 75%. And Africa is a continent that is warming faster than any other continent in the world, with over 20 of the countries warming faster than the entire globe combined. Then something is wrong. So and why I decided to put this in perspective, not just going straight to the meat of the discussion, is that I will be doing a disservice if I don't juxtapose this, because the argument in which I'm going to be making is going to take two questions. Because when you put this together, we need to answer two fundamental questions. And the first question is, how do we reimagine? Because what we are supposed to do now, we must reimagine our actions, climate action, the discussions. We must reimagine climate finance. We must reimagine how we can be able even to create the jobs for the youth, how we can be able to drive a food secured continent. We must reorganize. So the question is, how do we reimagine, reorganize, and redesign Africa's food security under the changing climate and the unsettling realities of this COVID-19? The second question is, how do we rebuild better, considering past mistakes that have been made in the continent? Because we must be realistic. The continent have made mistakes, and some of those mistakes are as a result of have resulted to what we are seeing today. And when you put all this in perspective, starting with the second question, I'll start with the second question. We need to understand, why are we where we are today? When did the rain start hitting Africa? If you look across the entire world, of course, there is a pandemic that affected the entire world. But in the continent today, on top of the pandemic,
yeah, we have other issues that are actually causing a lot of pain to people that the pandemic is only coming to exacerbate. In the country where the rain started hitting Africa. And an African proverb put this in perspective, that you do not look where you fell, you do not look where you fell, but where you sleep. Where you actually sleep and fell, you don't look where you fell, you look where you sleep. So the question is, in the context of this discussion today, we need to ask where the proverbial rain started hitting the continent. And the answer lies in the mindset of materialism. I think the founder of Future Servers alluded to this. The reality is that I have said this, and I'll say it again today, and I'll keep saying it. We underestimate the power that people present, the power of ideas. Ideas transform societies. Money upfront without ideas bring fights and destroy societies. And therefore, the biggest weapon that we can leverage, the biggest tool we can leverage to fight climate change is human capital, is your skill and my skill. It is your skill, your idea brought together will bring the money. And money is not necessarily always cash. It's about collaboration. And so we're talking in a continent when we know that skills outweighs material, but sometimes material has blinded us. And we have entrusted Africa's transformation on mineral resources rather than on limited potential inherent in people. Unless we prioritize people, we might never be able even to drive and build socio-economic resilience of the continent. The second question, the first question, I started with the second intentionally. The second question sums up a dimension in which we need to think about moving forward, because with that, recognizing people as strategic assets, you can, no matter whether you have trillions of dollars, those trillions of dollars would never move an inch of any development. To the first question, I would say every adversity carries with it a seed of equal or greater benefit. Challenges are disguised opportunities. The changing climate provides or presents opportunities for the continent. Beneath Africa's innumerable climate change and food security challenges lie opportunity for competitive enterprises. I mentioned earlier, the continent is losing food worth $48 billion as a result of inefficiency in the entire global value chain. And agriculture is not only about production. And I've argued about this all the time. If Africa is food insecure, and the solution anytime is always about production, how come the continent is losing food worth $48 billion each and every year? So where is that food coming from if the problem was production alone? It means that Africa produces enough to feed the people. And at the same time, Africa is importing food worth $35 billion, and this number in the next 5 years is projected to reach $110 billion. And therefore, it presents an opportunity that within the changing climate, there could be climate action approaches that are taken to be able to reverse this inefficiency in the agro-value chain. And as a result of doing that, we'll create opportunities, especially for the young people, but build climate resilience and ensure that people put more money in more pockets. And these will create an agro-economy worth $1 trillion less than 10 years. And empirical evidence have also shown that if we are able to reduce the inefficiency in the entire agro-value chain, we can create up to about 17 million jobs each and every year. And therefore, we need then to look at how can we then leverage climate action approaches as a potential pivot within the agro-value chain, ensuring that any action that is climate action to reverse these post-harvest losses takes an enterprise approach. Because social-driven development approaches have not worked. If they worked, we will not have 257 million people going to bed hungry. Social-driven approaches have not worked, because if they worked, we will not be talking about importation of food. An enterprise approach is the way in which climate action is supposed to take. And all these cannot happen without having youth at the center of all this equation. Ensuring we put youth at the forefront as operational solution providers will complete the equation. But the question is always is how. I have 5 points that I'll leave you with. I have 10 minutes, I hope I'm almost over. The first is the reality about climate action anywhere in this continent and broadly across the world is about socioeconomic. Fundamentals do not change. If you tell a hungry child that you gave him or her food yesterday, that doesn't mean anything to that child at that particular moment. If you tell a hungry child that you gave him or her food yesterday, it means nothing. That doesn't mean fundamentals cannot be changed. And I'm talking about economic fundamentals here. Fundamentals like those who are going to bed hungry. So if we are to drive climate action in a way that lifts people from the bottom of the pyramid, if you're talking to a mother in a village, or you're talking to a youth who doesn't have a job, and you're talking climate change, the way we speak about it with big grammar and enjoying it, it means nothing. You must speak from the dimension of what he can be able to do to put more money in more pockets. And I think Megan and Matt will attest to this. I always make this argument. If you look at the hurricanes that happen in the United States, let me just give that example, and you take the cyclones that happen in Africa. If you take Cyclone Idai or Cyclone Kenneth, a lot of destruction happened and more lives were lost. But in the United States, yes, destruction also happened, but fewer lives are lost. But any life lost anywhere is a tragedy. The point I'm trying to make is this. When people are not empowered socioeconomically, they will not be able to build climate resilience. And therefore, socioeconomic empowerment is the best climate action. And any action we take must be able to build people's socioeconomic resilience. That's the best way to lift people from harm's way, to take people off harm's way. Because if you take Mozambique, in a city called Beira, that killed over 1,000 people, those people could not even afford, even if they were warned months earlier, where will they go to? They do not have money. They don't even have anywhere to go to. And therefore, any action we take should be to empower people socioeconomically. And so economic fundamentals matter. And therefore, we need to urgently address the aspect of value addition. So value addition in the continent is the only way to build that socioeconomic resilience, to ensure that a mother who produces a vegetable can add value to it. And adding value can then mean that even if she doesn't have a market to sell it, she can still keep it without losing it in terms of post-harvest losses. And simple solutions that are climate action solutions, local solutions that you're already championing across the continent, like solar dryer, can dry vegetables, dry tomatoes, dry cassava, and convert these to other products. This is already happening. And the second aspect is about financing climate action in the continent. Food security is not a standalone